So far, I guess you've heard discussions about the proposal for Windsor and Burwood. There are a number of other announcements that have been made around other schools in the area, and I guess we just want everyone to have an awareness of what they are, because they also impact what might happen here long term. So just to, I guess, summarise the key ones, which are schools close to us. We have Marston School, which is tagged or proposed to relocate, possibly within the News Preston subdivision, and they may go and become a Year 1 to 13 school. We also have Chisnawood, which, as Andrew mentioned earlier, we are one of the biggest contributing schools to Chisnawood, and it is proposed to close and merge into a Aranui cluster that will again cater for children from Year 1 to 13. We also have Shirley Intermediate, which is another option for parents around here, which is flagged to close. And I guess we've also discussed within this discussion already about the idea of a cluster which we will be part of, which is the Parklands cluster, which includes Queen's Park School and Parkview School, which will remain the same, and Marston School and Windsor and Burwood are in that cluster. So as you can see, there is a lot of other things that are going on in the community with the other schools that will impact, I guess, how education is happening in this area. So I guess the main question on everyone's minds probably is why change? Which was, I guess, what we all said at the beginning. Well, hey, this is a great proposal, or not, however you want to stand on it. But I guess the key thing to try and understand tonight is why the Ministry want to make some changes. There are sort of key criteria that they used to come up with these proposals. First of all, they looked at the demographic data for this area. Overall of Christchurch, there are now 4,000 less children than there were prior to the earthquakes. There has been quite an impact on our community. And interestingly enough, according to their data, even prior to the earthquakes, there was quite a lot of spare capacity over schools in Christchurch. There was what they call 5,000 seats free within schools in Christchurch, even prior to the earthquake. So if you add those two numbers together, there was quite a lot of extra capacity around. So this sort of drove a lot of their decision making to come up with these proposals. Again, according to the Ministry data, their projections suggest there will be less children in this area going forward, so that also had an impact. So those are sort of their projections. I guess the other key thing or key element to all of this, unfortunately, is the earthquakes of the last couple of years have created significant damage to land and liquefaction risks to some of the existing schools in the area. Obviously, we do have some damage on Windsor site, but not significant damage. Again, some of the other schools had a little bit more. The other thing that's sort of come into play, I guess, with some of the data that they used was they took an opportunity to look at all the infrastructure and come up with a bit of a projection for trying to cover some of the other areas to do with infrastructure, such as earthquake strengthening. They want to make sure that all the schools are right up to code to create safe environments, and also the weather tightness issues. So they were all sort of added into the mix when they were looking at the cost of, I guess, bringing up all the schools and the buildings to sort of 21st century structures. So that is kind of the data that they used. If you are interested, on the Ministry of Education website there is details of all that data that you can go and look up. Anyone can look it up. It's got it for all the different schools in the area, so if you want more information, it's available. And we'll be talking about the data a wee bit later.
So what does it actually mean for us? I think just summing up a couple of things that have been said. So the merged school will exist on the Windsor site, and we'll get the opportunity to rebuild some of the damaged buildings we have. So the damage being damage deemed, I guess, warrant of repair by the Ministry. And the proposed merger would occur in January 2016, and at that point Burwood would close. So I guess what it means to us is we need to have continued leadership, strong governance of both schools in order to succeed. we have an opportunity to merge, or the Ministry have stated that there is an opportunity to merge sooner than that, if that was in a proposal. So they're open to merging earlier. So I get the numbers. Thank you, Ellie. Kind of get fed up with them sometimes. So size of the current school, top left you'll see a number of 581, which is the total roll for Windsor. And bottom right you see a figure of 581 as well, which is the total for in-zone students for both schools. So clearly the Ministry's thinking is considering in-zone children only. And clearly there's a fair bit of out-of-zone children in both schools at the moment, and we have to cater for that, which we believe is the reason why we've been given the 2016 date. So that gives us 3 years for these out-of-zone children to leave both schools, and then it gives us, I guess, 3 years to manage what happens after that. So the Board of Trustees would have to provision thereafter. So siblings of out-of-zone children at the schools joining the Board of Trustees would have to manage that. So if you look at 2017 and projected size, first thing to note here is that the difference between July and December for year 1 to 6, that increases of course as you get new entrants from July to December. So going from 581 to 630 in year 1 to 6. And if you look at year 1 to 8, which has been derived, these numbers have been derived in the same manner, so in zone only, we're looking at 746 to 800 in December. Now, you look at that 800 number, there's also potential for downside of that. If we look at potentially 6% of people in zone moving out of zone because of being in the red, that takes maybe 45 off that down to 750 odd again. And we also have to consider the Prestons Road residential development and the potential new school for Marshlands. So, and that may have an impact, of course, on our enrolment zone as well. So, I guess in the wrap, you're looking at about 750 students for a year 1 to 8 school.
Can I just point out there, just in case people are freaking, that they're out of zone. It doesn't mean anyone's going to be asked to move their children because they're out of zone. What the Ministry is doing is saying, in the future, when you look at the school numbers, they're considering who lives in zone rather than school building extra space and then trying to equate children from out of zone. So don't be worrying that the end of this means that if you're an out of zone parent, your child or your child's siblings wouldn't be considered. Because the board made a strong commitment that once your child is in the school, if you've got siblings, then we're going to look out for them as well. Just in case any of you are sitting there.
So Neil's right. When you read the information from the Ministry and you have a look at some of those individual school reports, it's very clear that the Ministry's focus now is providing localised education. And under the Education Act, that's actually all they have to do. They have to provide education within your home zone. And so that's what they're focusing on. And that's how they fund us. And so when Tom mentioned how we're going to manage siblings for the future, basically what happens is, if the merge happens and then we become this in-zone area, if we have a number of siblings, as Neil says, we will take them, we won't be asking anybody to leave. But if we needed a new classroom, that's the responsibility of the school to provide rather than the Ministry funding it. So it's a continual sort of juggling act. Going on to the other impacts of the merger. So in terms of staffing, and these are all coming from the NZEI collective contract, so the teaching union's contract dictate what happens when a school closes, what happens when a school merges. So in the case of a merger, both principals' roles are disestablished, and that, like any State Service Commission position above a certain level, that has to be advertised nationally. So we would go out nationally, we would obviously invite the two principals who are currently principals of the schools to apply for those positions if they wanted to, but we do go out to a national selection. Once that principal has been appointed, And as it moves closer to the time when the merger will happen, and they have a better idea on the student numbers for the following year, a whole staffing needs analysis is undertaken, and they work out how many teachers we need, how many support staff we need, how many we need at different levels. And that will obviously depend on whether at that time we recapitate or not, and whether we're looking at a year 1 to 6 school or a year 1 to 8 school. So there's a lot of unknown at this stage. For the other staff, their positions are known as ring-fenced. So once the staffing analysis has been done, we will say, okay, there is a need for X number of Scale A teachers, there's a need for X number of this, X number of that, and only teachers who are currently working in Windsor and Burwood schools can apply for those positions. If they don't get the positions for any reason, or if there are more staff than there are positions, then there is a clause in the contract to look at how they deal with that sort of redundancy situation. But that's the position at the moment. In terms of governance, what does it mean? When the Minister makes her decision next year on whether the schools merge or not, at that time she should announce whether there is a continuing board of trustees. In some cases that's the school, the site, the board for the school. The site that's continuing becomes the continuing board. In other cases, it may be a totally merged board, or in some cases, the ministry themselves appoint a new board. That board is then charged with managing the whole merger process. And it's important, and it says in the Education Act, that representatives from both schools need to be on that board. So it's important, if we do get into a situation where we are going to merge, that the whole community has a voice as we move through that process. Right, now, because I'm not checking my notes, I don't know when somebody else takes over, so they better just shout at me, otherwise I'll just carry on. Anyway, governing the process. So what do we actually do? So the Board of Trustees, whoever they are, first thing they have to do is recruit the principal for the merged school. So that's the most important thing that they have to do before anything. They then have to work with the principal to employ those other staff. And one of the key things is actually making that transition as smooth as possible for all our communities, and particularly for our children in the schools. Now currently, under the existing Education Act, 20 days after this new school is formed, so that would be January 2016, based on the current proposal, they have 28 days, and then there is new elections for a new Board of Trustees for the new community. Now there is some talk in the new revised Education Act that came out last week that may change, so we don't quite know what's going to happen there. If it's 2016, then in fact that is an election year for the Board of Trustees anyway, nationally. So there could be elections happening automatically anyway. Okay, so on to Andrew.